Very good.
All right, thank you. First up, we have our agenda review. The only change that was made since it was published was we actually just moved the policy discussion item to the first discussion item so that folks can drop off if they want to after. But otherwise, it's the same as what was published Wednesday. So at this point, would accept a motion to approve the agenda as published currently.
So move to approve the agenda as published.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second. Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Debbie, would you please call the vote?
Jonathan,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Tom. Oh no, Tom, Aaron.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tom's not going to be here tonight, he said. Okay, so that brings us to our policy updates. And as we've been doing, we're going to roll through these things one at a time on all the first reading items. And I saw that Dawn was promoted to panelist, so excellent. We can go through and she can give us the sort of summary that goes behind each of these that are in first reading.
Daniel, I believe we have Melissa, Cipher Briggs, and Dixon joining us as well. Dixon Bledsoe. Just need to promote them as well.
So the way that we, oops, sorry, I don't have video, do I? Let's see. Hey, Daniel, I don't think I have control over video on my end. But we'll go with audio for now. So what we're going to do, Scott, is switch off months. So this will be my last month presenting. And then next month we'll have either Melissa or Dixon, and then the next person will be October, and then I'll be back in November.
That's right. You mentioned that to me already. Sorry about that, Dawn.
Dawn, I see that you're muted. I don't know if that was you or if Daniel.
Okay, now I'm muted again. Okay, sorry. There we go. All right.
There you go.
Back now? I think when he promoted me as a panelist, it reset everything. Okay, so sorry. Here we go. There's just a few tonight. A couple are really short, including this first one, which is speaking about compliance and reporting on standards. This just set a new due date. Super, super simple. No edits made at all. And again, this is policy CM, the very first one on your agenda tonight. So any questions about this one?
Nope, not for me.
Okay, I'm just going to breeze through because, again, that's probably the easiest one. The second one on your agenda is an AR. The policy for this had its first read at the June work session. This one, we needed a little bit more time to have Dan look at it. Very, very minor edits here. Oops.
Oh.
Okay. Anyway, this one is an optional, but because we were updating the policy, we went ahead and looked at the AR and made some very minor changes.
Yeah.
Quick questions. So just two quick questions. Under number one, I'm assuming office equipment includes computers, most notably, but they're not called out specifically.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, when we looked at this, we thought, well, fax machines is very 1980 and also not super comprehensive. So we added the term office equipment just to be a little bit more inclusive of other things that might be in an office.
Okay. And then the only other one is you deleted the definition of fact-finding mission. But then what is meant by a fact-finding mission? Will that be clear without the definition, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah. Let me find that.
Bottom of the second page.
Thank you. Oh, this is actually an OSBA deletion. So I'm not sure the history behind that, but they're the ones that deleted that.
Okay. All right. Because it seems like it's a big exemption. You know, these restrictions do not apply if, but I'm not entirely clear what that is. Just a fact finding. Does it mean? Yeah. So maybe I'll reach out to OSBA and ask them.
Yeah, it might be worth finding out. Usually when we see things deleted like that, it's usually because they just substitute whatever, state regulation is there, and they have a code for that usually. So it does seem odd that they would take out the definition without leaving any other explanation in there.
Okay. All right. All good. Thank you.
Yeah, let me know if you do go back and forth a little bit and we can bring this back up. And
I
edit
will,
it.
for
Okay.
sure.
Great. Any other questions on this one?
No.
All right, let's move along. So the next one, we're looking at tag students identification of. This is a required change. And there were a couple of things that I want to point out that were significant. In the first paragraph, we decided to add student input for students in grades 6 through 12. This was just a discussion item that we had. And when we're talking about the tag program, to establish an identification process, we wanted students to have some role in that, since this does affect them directly. So again, we modified it to talk about what grades, but that's a substantial change. The other thing that we did, two more things. The next one I think is substantial to mention is that we removed the reference to the SBAC, as standardized test names do change over time and exams themselves are deleted, changed, and edited. So we just took out that reference and left in a more generic one. And then finally, the third to last paragraph under eligibility criteria, we talked about test biases, and we talked about whether or not we wanted to delete that 97% minimum score. This is an issue that I've dealt a lot with in my work with dyslexic students and students who are twice exceptional or 2E. So students that might have a learning difference, but also happen to be tagged. However, Melissa dug a little deeper for us and found that that 97% is actually referenced in an OAR. So we didn't feel like we could remove it. So we did have an interesting discussion around it, but we also felt that that concern was somewhat covered by the other language that allows us to look at other documentation, not just test scores.
Mhm.
Okay, so any questions on this one?
Yeah, I have a question. I wonder about removing the smarter balance. I agree that we shouldn't call it smarter balanced because we don't even call it smarter balanced anymore. But I tend to personally call it state tests because we're always going to have a state test. However, one of the things that the state tests aren't necessarily nationally normed. And therefore, the way this is written would exclude the state tests from being used. And I personally would really refrain from doing that, because that's one of the best ways for us to get the academically talented students identified. So I would be a little concerned about taking out the reference to state tests entirely, because then it seems like we can't use them.
Right, and we didn't take out state tests, but we did take out that specific test.
So let me look at it again and see how it is worded, because it would be really, important to actually list. Does it say state test? I'm sorry, I'm off of it now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me, if you want, I can share my screen with you and we can look at
Oh,
this
sure. Yeah,
real
that's
quick.
good. That's a good point.
Okay, let's do that real quick. So everyone can see this now? Yep. Okay, so number 4, Jennifer, is this one right here. So it starts out by stating a nationally standardized academic achievement test of reading or math. And what we took out was the bracketed language, and we struck on the smarter balanced assessment.
Okay, but it's also struck the test of English language arts, literacy, or total mathematics.
It says or a test.
Yeah, and that's struck, right?
Right.
So to me, when I read this, it seems like using the state test would not be permitted.
Okay, so riddle me this, because this is definitely more your expertise. so a test of total ELA literacy or total math, could that refer to state or national, or would it just be specific to state?
To me, seems to me like it's more like the WISC or the Wyatt or some
Right.
other school psych test that uses combined scores. And so that even isn't strong enough for me. Like, I want to know that I can use state tests.
Okay, so how about we do this?
And the rules apply to that. I mean, state rules, I think, I actually can't tell you where it's listed, so I can't, don't quote me, but that's a thing. Like, the state puts out percentiles and we use them to try to find that 97th percentile. So yeah, if it could say something like, or Oregon state tests or something like that, I think to me, I would feel more comfortable with, it broadens things up.
Okay, so let me, what I'm going to recommend, this is up for discussion, of course, is that we asked Melissa to dive into the OARs a little bit, but since it was mandated in there, the 97th percentile, I'm also assuming that there will be other language around which specific tests. I don't actually know, because there's nothing in here right as is that mentions state tests. It's all talking about national tests. So I just want to make sure we're good with that. And if we have to, we'll go back to OSBA to ask specifically, but does that sound like the research that we need to do?
I think that's good. And also there is a tag person at ODE who may be able to help as well. And I did want to mention that Oregon law does allow districts to set their own potential to perform at the 97th percentile threshold. Actually, they make provisions that you don't even have to use percentiles. Some districts have adopted that. So it's 97th is the state rule. You have to use that, but you can, like in my school district, we have a potential to perform category, which is 93rd to 96th percentile. And so, we use it in Woodburn just as a broadening up of the opportunity, but the state doesn't like count those numbers. They count their 97th and above numbers. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that there is a provision that allows districts to set their own. I wouldn't want to do that without staff input, though. I think staff input and staff initiative would be really important in that regard.
And then let me ask you a follow-up question to that. So is that something that would be in an AR, or would you expect that to be in a policy?
That's in the Oregon administrative rules, I believe.
I'm sorry, let me clarify. So when you say,
you mean AR versus policy? It is in Woodburn anyway. It is in, I can't remember, can't tell you. It's in one of them.
Yeah.
But the board, it was board adopted, so I'm thinking it was a policy.
Okay.
So if I could interject here real quick. So I've pulled up the OARs for talented and gifted, and there's, the list of 4 that we have on this policy here is really just a summary of, it's just picked 4 of many that are in this. And so just to address Jennifer's question, I'm just going to read one sentence out of here that says, academically talented students shall score at or above the 97th percentile on a test of total reading or a total mathematics from a nationally standardized test battery, comma, a nationally standardized test of reading or mathematics, comma, or a test of total reading or total mathematics on the Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skills. So I think that having, and I'm not sure how old this OAR is, but just because I Googled it. And so, but my guess is it's probably not changed dramatically, other than, let me see if I could do a little sleuthing to find out how old that OAR was that I pulled up.
Well, if they're referencing the Oaks test, when did we switch over, educators?
A long time ago.
It's been a long time, but I don't even know what they call it now. But again, that might be a good question for the state,
The tag coordinator, yeah.
yeah, there's a tag person at the state who can probably help with that, because that is our practice, is that we use the state tests. It's called OSAS now, Oregon State Assessment System.
And again, if we
then-
have the option to have something more generic in there, like, a state standardized test, that would help us avoid this, changing of names over the years too.
Yeah, agreed. Because basically math state tests or reading state tests are what we use. And the other thing that I did have a question about at the top with the student input thing, I think student input is great. Is that something that would be required?
No, I don't think so. That's not what we discussed. But I think when there's an opportunity and when we have students involved, at leadership levels, for example, students serve on committees, I kind of envisioned it as something like that.
Yeah, but this is specifically for identification, and so and in my practice, since I've been a tag coordinator, students, we do have ways for students to, give input. If I had to be tied to that, I wouldn't be happy because that would actually make it harder to identify kids, if I didn't have that piece. So yeah, I think it's great to have student participation. I just wondered if that was if it was something that would be required.
Well, I think in general terms, we were talking about when we look at a written identification process, that yes, we would want students' involvement. Does that help? Not necessarily on a individual level in determining, is this person a tag kid, but rather looking at the criteria process. Yes.
Don, can I ask a question about that?
Mhm.
What problem does adding that statement solve? Is it solving a problem, or is it just because it sounds inclusive? I'm just trying to
Yes.
understand if
It
there's a
solves
real
the-
problem there.
Mhm. I think it solves the problem in that there are, I think like many districts, that our tag process could be more robust. And I think that oftentimes it does leave out marginalized students, whether those are twice exceptional learners, like our dyslexic plus tag learners, or students of color who do not historically score well on standardized tests. So it's an effort to make sure that this process does identify tag students.
And thank you, Dawn, for that clarification, because I was reading it wrong. So I get
Oh,
it.
got it.
The students is about establishing the written process. I get that
Yes.
now.
One
Yeah.
time, one and done, right?
Got it.
So yes, but let's do a couple things. Jennifer, if you don't mind, if you could look up and see what Woodburn's policy looks like, because we could probably learn something from that. And then I will double check with the rest of the group and look at that clause about adding back in that state exam. And then
I
we'll bring
went
this
to
back.
I went to the ODE website and pulled up their FAQ for tag questions. And so one of the questions on there is, what test should be used to identify a tag student? And it says, to be identified as a student who is academically gifted in reading or math, the student must score at or above the 97th percentile on a test of total reading or a test of total mathematics from a nationally standardized test or statewide assessment.
Perfect.
And that's coming from the ODE website. So, I mean, I think that however we want to change that of, a nationally standardized academic achievement test of reading and mathematics or statewide assessment, I think that solves the issue.
Okay, how about that? I just added in this clause right there.
And if I could just add to Jonathan's comment about the 612, having been a middle school principal, when I would get, for a long time, when I would get parents asking for testing, I definitely wanted students part of that conversation, because at that age, why is mom in the principal's office asking about assessments? And so I wanted to be really including the students in that conversation, so that they felt like they had a role in the decision before going
you.
into identification. So I'm very supportive of that.
Okay, and I'm just, as I'm, editing on the fly here, So here's how it reads now. A nationally standardized academic achievement test or statewide assessment of reading or mathematics for assistance in identifying academically talented students. Does that sound good to everyone? Fantastic. All right. Excellent discussion, people. Anything else on this one? All right.
Well, before we move on, can we look at that sentence one more time?
Yes, the one that we just edited.
Yes.
Okay, there it is. Do you want me to read it out loud again, Owen?
Well, so I think we might have changed the meaning of the sentence just by adding that or statewide assessment. We might need commas in there.
Well,
Somebody else who's better at grammar than me, but it's because we don't want it to read a nationally standardized academic achievement test, period, then or assessment, but
Oh,
both
sorry,
of-
there's no period, but I'm all for
No, I see
commas if
that.
you guys want to make that a phrase. Jennifer, did
Well,
you have something?
to speak to
I think
Owen's
it should, go ahead.
point, it needs to, I don't know how to write it, but it needs to be the nationally standardized academic achievement test of reading or mathematics, or a statewide assessment of reading and mathematics. Like,
Right.
Okay, let's be a little
Yes.
redundant and safer.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, check that out. Make sure I got it right.
Looks
Um,
good.
And I'll say just grammar wise, I don't think a comma is needed. I think just or statewide is good. I don't think either commas are needed.
I'm going to overrule you on that one, but I'm willing to be talked out of it. I'm always looking at this, Erin, with an eye towards readability.
Gotcha. A nice
so-
little pause.
Thanks. I'm real big on phrases.
I gotcha.
Okay. Anything else?
I think the rule is if you can take out the part in between the commas, then that you're using the commas correctly. And I think you could take out the part.
All right.
So-
That's a great rule. I like that.
I learned that in
My
8th
practice.
grade. Daily oral language is like one of the things that stuck with me.
Excellent. Very good. All
Is
right.
your teacher still with us?
Mrs. Karin, I don't know. I'm not connected with her anymore, but
She would be
happy
really
to hear.
proud of you.
yeah.
She would. We should send her the recording. All right. Should we move on to the AR? Is it helpful to have this on the screen, you guys? Because I'm happy to just keep sharing my screen on this.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, so
Yeah,
you'll
so-
ignore my little highlights here, but these are things I want to make sure I point out to you guys. So again, this is an AR. Leslie and Dan have gone through this together and with us. The only thing that was substantial that I wanted to point out is that we changed parent because this, again, we're adding in more student input, we changed that term to complainant withstanding. So it could be a student, it could also be a guardian, right? Not always a parent. And also a teacher, maybe a teacher advocating for their kid. So here's what that looks like. It's this phrase right here that we changed. We just added that in. And again, we changed this term complainant instead of a parent and or student. Otherwise, there was some bracketed language that we chose or that Dan chose, Leslie. But otherwise, I'm trying to think. Those were really the only things I wanted to point out. And again, on my screen, you'll see the pink, anything in pink was an OSBA strikeout. Everything in green is what we did as a work group.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Also yellow, while we're talking about colors, is also what OSBA has highlighted, usually bracketed language that needs to be chosen, edited, or deleted. Okay, any questions on the AR? All right, I'm gonna keep moving because you guys are quiet. So let me close these out since I know we're done with those. Okay, next, school counseling program, highly recommended. Again, this was due to a law that was adopted in 2019. And you can see here, very, very small changes here. The most significant is the bracketed language that we needed to look at. So let's take a quick peek there. So, and again, Dan, please feel free to speak up when this part in particular here was bracketed language that our district is choosing to not include. It has to do with including a child development specialist program. And again, that's something that causes a higher level of obligation. It doesn't mean that we can't do it, but the preference was to not have this in policy. Let me just scroll down, make sure, yeah, that's pretty much it. So because we struck that, we also struck that footnote number 2. All right, any questions on those? Can you guys hear my dogs? They're being obnoxious. Hold on, I'm gonna go close my window. Okay, questions on IJ? Nope. All right. What's that expression? Silence is consent or something? That's wrong. That's a very bad one. Okay. JEC admissions is our next one, an optional change. And yeah, okay. The only thing I want to mention on this, if you read footnote number 1, we did discuss it. I literally had to have Melissa take it apart for me and put it back together because it really didn't make sense to my brain. But we did take this one back from our last work session where Owen had a concern about how this first part was phrased. We discussed it again as a work group and came in with slightly different language. So we did keep the specifications of the old policy, which was age 6 on or before September 1 and age 5 on or before September 1 for kinder. But we did add in here immediately preceding the beginning of the current school term, which we thought was a good change from addition from OSBA. So see how that reads to you now. Again, we looked at this last month, but we went from this struck out language down here to the kind of a combination of old language with that new phrase up here.
Looks clear to
I
me.
wonder about the term. Like, does that mean that they have to be 5 or they have to be 6 to enroll in that semester, or can they enroll as, oh yeah, that's what it does mean. It's like,
Yeah.
if they turn 6 on the second day of school, that's a
They're out.
no-go in this situation, right?
This is from a mom with a kid on September 9th. That's it.
Yeah, got
No
it.
questions. Yeah. Yeah. All right. But
So
otherwise,
I will comment on that briefly. I'd be fine, by the way, I want to say I'm fine proceeding with this policy update based on the tweaks that are being made, but I actually want us to revisit the question of the hard and fast stance of September 1st. That's actually something I didn't realize the district had changed in the last maybe 10 years or so. That certainly was not the case as my kids were entering school. And I have a child who started after that date because at the time there was a window that allowed there to be an assessment. I believe it was September 1 through maybe November 30th. I want to say it was about maybe those 3 months. And there was some flexibility there. I generally despise hard and fast, and I think some flexibility has a lot of value here. And so if we didn't want to delay this update for that conversation, I'm fine proceeding with this, but I really would like us to have that conversation before next year's admission would begin, in time, I guess, to affect next year's admission, because at this point, we're too late for this year anyway.
Jonathan, and you and I have spoken about that. I think you bring up a very compelling point, and this is definitely something I would want to take to my team before even taking it to my policy work group. There's a lot of implications here and a lot of things to consider, but I think you're right on, and we'll make sure that we do that.
yeah, I think that's a great idea. As a parent with 2 fall babies, I would love to see that. Yeah.
If I have a little bit of history on that, because when this when the testing option was going to be phased out, I actually came to the board and gave comment that it was really detrimental in the case of, it was my daughter's best friend was going to enter first grade early. Her birthday was in September. And she'd already completed, 3 years of preschool and kindergarten, and this child was ready. And what they ended up doing was admitting her. She was the last one to get to test. But then they changed the policy. And I think it was because that there was an inundation of people trying to get early admission. And it was, the reasoning behind it, like the staff was concerned that parents were, applying for early admission just so that they could get their kids in a full day program instead of, because the child was ready. I think that was the main issue. And so, yeah, I echo Scott's concern, not concern, but Scott's sentiment of asking staff, what their experience, how their experience would inform them in this issue, because I could see it either way. I happen to have experience with it both ways, and I think it's worth a discussion as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I wonder too, I mean, this is, going a little beyond, but with universal preschool happening, is there an opportunity or any discussion at all about TK, transitional kindergarten, in Oregon? I mean, that happens in other states, but.
To my knowledge, Dawn.
Yeah, that's just an interesting point. And yeah, I see both sides as well. I went to college at 17 and had zero business being at college at 17. I'm a December baby. So, all right, any other questions? Oh, and the other thing I was going to ask, Dan, do you happen to know if there's an AR for this? And if so, would that kind of, evaluation piece be included there? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Give me a moment and I will.
Thank you.
Find that out.
Yeah, I'm surprised that it's not in the policy because I guess, well, let's see, let's look at the history on this again. The last update on this was, it was 2019, so it was fairly recent. So that might have been when it was removed, Jennifer? Do you remember the history on that, or was it before?
Well,
that?
it was, when did my kid start first grade? She's 16, so 10 years ago.
Yeah. Man, that was a fast 10 years.
Yes, it is.
There is no AR.
Okay. All right. Well, that answers that question.
Dawn,
so yeah. Mm-hmm.
Quick grammar correction, I believe. The final paragraph. So all the paragraphs above it basically have the phrase "are residents of the district," and that paragraph is missing that phrase. It basically is sort of a let's see, wait a minute. It's the students whose parent or guardian voluntarily placed the child outside the child's home. Page 2.
Oh, wait, down here.
Here we go. Second paragraph of that page. It needs are residents of the district.
I think.
Unless you wanted to put that up at the top and take it out of every paragraph, so you don't have to repeat it every time, but.
I think this is actually specific language. Hey, Dan, would you read this over with me? But I'm pretty sure it has to be this way because it's actually talking about when they're not in the district.
But it doesn't, it's actually not a complete, it's like a run-on. If you read it, there's no like verb.
Okay, that never happens with these policies. Okay. Voluntary place the child outside the child's home. Oh, I see what you mean. They're kind of.
All of them say are considered residents of the district, or minor students living within or who reside in the district are considered residents of the district. There's just that clause there. So you just need something in there that finishes the sentence.
Right. Let's figure out what that should.
Not particular about what it is.
Okay. I can work on that offline. I don't want to hold you guys
no
up from
worries.
your agenda.
Yep.
Thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to leave this on my screen. Anything else that you guys have picked up, or are you ready to move on? All right. Silence. That's a good thing. All right. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
Take care.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thanks, Don.
Glad I could help.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dixon.
Dixon.
That's great.
I'll talk next time. Good night.
Good night.
And Melissa, I don't know if she's on, but thanks to her too.
She's not here yet, but we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Dixon.
All right, that moves us to 3B, which is superintendent goals. And at this point, I believe, Scott, you're planning to present.
Yes, and I'm going to share screen right now. And let me see if I can figure this out. And okay, can you all see that? Give me a thumbs up. Great. So those of you who have seen me present before, and five of our 7 board members have, you know that going from in-person presentations to a 2-dimensional screen drives me absolutely insane, because I can't use my feet and my hands to drive my points home, and this type of work excites me to no end. So I'm going to do my best to walk you through this presentation. None of this will be new to you if you attended day 1 of the Leadership Institute. This is something that I rolled out to all of our district administrators, to our board members who are there, to our 15 identified teacher leaders, and to the executive boards of both associations. And so even though this is not set in stone in terms of your approval of my goals, this is the focus for Silver Falls School District going forward. And I think you'll find that the information that I share with you here will fit into just about any framework that we have. And I know that we use a specific framework from OSBA, and this fits quite nicely into that. And so I want to take you through our focus for 2021, 2022. As you know, we have a 5-year strategic plan. It's arguable in terms of when that plan started. I would personally argue that it started last year, even though we were under COVID, because the first year we had an interim superintendent and the plan hadn't been implemented yet. So we can talk about this stuff later, but all in all, this is an operationalized version of the strategic plan. And my job as your superintendent is to make sure that we reach our goals as set out by this plan. And so this is an operationalized version of that. This visual here, and those of you who know organizational change know that one of the most important things that a leader can do is communicate a straightforward and simple plan. No matter how complex it is, being able to get that point across to all stakeholders. And that's where you see this visual here. And it's basically our strategic plan. It goes over each of the goals. We have 3. It's on every student on track to graduate. Each student has social emotional skills to navigate their world, and that our facilities reflect the love and respect we have for our students. That's a little bit different than the verbiage used in the strategic plan. But again, this is an operationalized version of how we're focusing on the plan for this coming school year. And so you all had a little bit of reading to do on the hedgehog concept. This is a concept that is extremely important to our work. Does anybody want to tell me where the hedgehog concept comes from? Jennifer, where does the hedgehog concept come from?
I actually don't know. That wasn't in the part of the reading you assigned us, I don't think. I don't know why we call it the hedgehog concept, but I can say that
That's okay.
that you really want to focus on that orange spot there, because that's what's going to make you go from good to great. You're
right on track. You nailed it. You're almost on track. Aaron Cook, I know you did the readings. How about you? Take a stab at the hedgehog concept.
I don't remember the onus of where it came from. I would, to Jennifer's point, I don't remember seeing that in the reading, but more of just the tenets of the individual concepts and that oversection or intersection point where we need to hone in on.
Right on. So what I'm hearing both you say is it's that intersectionality, that point right in the center. And just so you know, the hedgehog concept comes from the research of Jim Collins, who took a look at over 1,435 companies and found 11 companies that had beat the odds, and that's over 40 years of data. And they had beat the market by many times over, and they had certain things in common. He found 7 things in common, and one of those 7 things was each organization had a hedgehog concept, and that's the confluence of 3 different things. What are you really passionate about? What do you think you can be the best in the world at? Also, what do you not think you can be best in the world at? And what drives your economic engine? And so for a social sector or a government sector like a public school system, 2 of the circles are still the same. I would argue that we're absolutely passionate about transforming students' lives, that they stay on a trajectory towards graduation. We've demonstrated that throughout history in Silver Falls with a high graduation rate. There's no reason why we can't get to 100% graduation rate. And then what do we feel that we're best at? I think is also best answered in what we feel we're not going to be best at. And that's to focus on teaching and learning, but even more specifically, teaching and learning in a standards-based model. And that's coming from all the feedback and data that I've looked at and our feedback from our teacher teams that says that having a K-12 aligned, guaranteed and viable curriculum is something that we can definitely be best in the world at. And in terms of what drives our success engine, I would pose this question to you as a board. If we were a company, what would drive our economic engine would, of course, be revenue or money. Does anybody want to take a stab at a public school system? What would drive our success engine? Instead of economics, instead of revenue, it would be...
Wasn't it our resources?
Yeah, our resources. And what would those resources come in the form of for a district like Silver Falls?
I guess
oh, sorry, Aaron.
no, go ahead, Janet.
No, I was thinking that this, what he called the sustainable resource engine, and I was thinking about that because obviously your resources are your teachers,
Yeah.
right? Your funding at a very basic level. But I was trying to think about what fuels those teachers, and it's passion, it's commitment to those students. And, you know, so how do you make sure that you have enough fuel? How do you fuel those teachers and continue to fuel their passion for what they do? But that was just my take on it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, Janet. I would say that, you know, teacher retention would be one. So I would say, and maybe I would argue in addition to what would drive our resource engine is trust. And so predictability over time, consistency over time equals trust. And I would say the longer we hold on to our teachers, the more we feed our teachers professional development that is meaningful to them, the more trust we build. The more trust we build, the more people believe in the brand of Silver Falls, and the more people believe in the brand of Silver Falls, the more political capital we get in terms of asking voters to say vote for a capital improvement bond. Something like that. So we could kind of take that angle on a hedgehog concept, and we'll be working on that throughout the school year. I'll be coming back to you with that. But this concept is really huge because so many times what happens in public school districts is they get focused on so many different things that they can't do any one thing well. And that's one of the things that separates really great organizations from just ones that are successful or just, if not mediocre, because they don't focus their efforts on one thing that they feel they can be the best at. And so I'm going to go over with you in our focus a little bit about what we think we can be the best at. And then I'll answer your questions along the way if you want. So as you know, this is just a fancy visual. We have these visuals up throughout the district. You will be seeing them. And again, it communicates a complex plan in a very simple way. But a goal without a plan is just a wish. And this is the plan here. And so I'm going to walk you through each one of the 3 parts. And we'll start with goal number 1, which is making sure that each child is on track to graduate. And in order to do that, we need to get very scientific about how we address teaching and learning and how we organize ourselves as a K-12 system. And so one of the things that we'll be focusing on, and I'll come back to this document, again, you can pull this up yourself and read this. I'm not going to read this to you. Everything that I talk about goes directly back to what is written in this plan. So on the left, you'll see the key strategies that operationalize our pathway towards this goal for this school year. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see what that looks, sounds, and feels like. And that's how we will know if we were successful with those strategies or not. And so our focus this year and our focus going forward is on what we call Tier 1 instruction. And Tier 1 instruction means that this is the instruction that all students in Silver Falls get. So all students in the general ed environment, all of our kids get really sound instruction. That's what we're focused on. And then the tiers 2 and 3 mean what a child needs in addition to. And that could come by way of reading intervention, a small group, could be a little bit of pullout where a child gets a double dose of instruction. But what we're talking about here is good Tier 1 instruction. So we know whether or not students have responded to good instruction from the teacher. And so it really doesn't matter what our interventions look like as a school system. It really, unless we can answer the question that instruction is sound in the general education environment. And so that's where we come into a guaranteed and viable curriculum, a guaranteed and viable standards-based curriculum where all students in Silver Falls have access to that high quality teaching and learning in a standards-based model, and to where we're coming together and teams of teachers are developing these standards-based units and assessing them with common assessments, so we're speaking the same language. So all of this work in Tier 1 should be and will be driven by the experts in our district, which are our teachers. And so that's really where the focus is for this coming school year on Tier 1 instruction. And we're basing that off of a couple of really key research points. Number one is feedback. We have to know what students are going to learn throughout the course of a school year. We have to deeply understand what it is that the Common Core state standards are asking for. And we also need to focus on feedback. Feedback for our teachers as instructional leaders. Our job is to observe and give feedback to our teachers and our teacher teams, letting them know that they're on the right path. And also feedback from teachers to students. And we know that this is important given all the different meta studies that have been done, meta-analyses that have been done on what works in schools. And one thing we know is that when we look at effect size, a 0.4 effect size enables a child to make up 1 year of growth. And so a 0.73 effect size would be almost twice that. So the effect of actually telling a child, this is what you're going to learn, this is where you need to be once the teaching is done, and this is how we're going to get there, actually has very strong influence on their academic achievement. That's the first one, is feedback. Going back to having kids on track to graduate. The second one, and more importantly, is this idea of collective teacher efficacy, which is the belief that a teacher team can influence student outcomes. And the most recent work is from John Hattie, who took 1,500 meta-analyses, put them together, and have found an effect size of 1.57. So that's 4 times the minimum amount. Well, let me say that again. That's 4 years worth of growth in 1 year. So if we look back at feedback is 0.73, collective teacher efficacy is 1.57. So basically what that should tell you is that, number one, students need to know how they're doing. They need to know what they're shooting for, and they need to know the criteria that they need to master to be able to show that they're proficient at something. And number two is, we know that the teacher is the most important thing regarding student achievement, the most important factor, but it's actually one more than that. It's actually the teacher team that makes the biggest difference on student achievement by a mile. And so what we want is a standards-based model, but we want teacher teams coming together and planning that instruction and assessing that student learning. And this comes by way of teacher teams mapping out how many standards there are to teach in one school year and how many instructional days we have, and then grouping those standards into units. And this is an example of what teachers in Silver Falls have done this year. We've had teacher teams working on this. to develop what we call projection maps, which is a promise to our community that we guarantee that if your child's in 4th grade, or in this case, 7th grade, that your child will learn a year's worth of content because we have it all laid out here in front of you. And these are state Common Core state standards, all mapped out into units by instructional days. And the reason why that's important is because when a team goes to teach these units, they need to be basically within the same area, vicinity of each other, so that they end on a similar date, so they can talk about their assessment data together and figure out next steps for their teaching and learning. And so really what this does is it answers the 3 most important questions around teaching and learning. And that is, what do we expect students to know? How will we know if they've learned it? And then what do we do if they didn't get it? Or what do we do when they did get it and they need something more? And so that's the basis and the foundational piece of a standards-based model that was completed last year. And this year, one of the things that teachers will be working on is planning the individual units. So teacher teams came together and created the projection maps from K-12 through each of the subject areas that we have. We're one of the only school districts in Oregon that has done that work, by the way. And this year, teacher teams will be working on the actual individual units. And so the beauty of this is that there's a district-wide approach to bring resources together to do the projection maps of how many standards need to be taught in each school year. But then there's the individual autonomy to then give those projection maps over to the schools. So the schools, the teacher teams at schools can develop the units. So it's that perfect balance of fidelity and autonomy that a public school system should have, and really honoring the expertise of our teachers. And a key part of this, and this goes back to the leadership part, is on monitoring. Because our teams do make agreements on what will be taught and how it will be taught. And it's up to us as instructional leaders to make sure we're building an environment to where teachers feel they can be successful, and where they feel that they can honor their team agreements. They have enough time to teach the subject matter, and they have enough time to enter into their authentic partnerships with their PLCs. And that we've also done the work eventually of having common assessments, which is something that our district has never had. So that when teachers come together, they're speaking the same language. And I can, if we're on a team together, I can say, well, Aaron, my kids didn't do as well on this standard, but your kids did. What did you do that made your kids so successful? And let's incorporate that into our agreements for next year, that sort of thing. And so this here is a visual of what our multi-year plan looks like. In September last year, we started on our projection mapping. I've been sending all of you the feedback to those trainings. And I would say, with the exception of one comment, the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. The teachers have been finding a lot of meaning in that work because they're the ones who are driving it. And then this year we're starting on building our units. So last year we decided we built the projection maps, which tells us how many standards we need to teach in a year. So children can make a year's worth of growth, K-12. And this year, starting August pre-service week, we're starting our unit mapping. And anything we put our teachers through, professional development wise, our instructional leaders have to go through it first. And so just like any great organization, anything we ask of the troops, the leaders have to go through it and show proficiency in it first, because if they haven't learned it, they can't lead it. And so, so we're working with our instructional leaders on that right now. And then in the next week or so, our teachers will be going through that. Next September, we'll be forming what we call assessment cadres. That's a really in-depth process for how we build common assessments. And I will be sharing a lot more with you on that as we move forward. And then the final 2 years, we'll be working on what's called full data team cycles. And that is when we come together as a teacher team, we've taught the unit, we've addressed the standards, we've now assessed the standards, and now we're coming together as a team to figure out who got it, who didn't, what do we need to do better in the next unit, and what types of things do we need to think about when we teach this unit again the following year. And all this goes back to keeping kids on track to graduate. So we know where every child is relative to the standards that they're learning.
I have a quick question on that map there, that is the calendar. How do you, how much of this can you actually implement now? If you're, I mean, you're basically building the road. Are you walking it as you're, are they implementing what they've developed
Yeah.
so far? I mean, help me understand how this all happens simultaneously.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So last year was a little bit easier because we're coming together with teacher teams and just figuring out how many Common Core standards we have at each grade level in each content area, and how do we map those out over a year. During pre-service week, teachers will be developing Unit 2, which starts somewhere around October. Now, every teacher teaches to the standards, right? I mean, that's by law, we teach the standards. We're a public school system. But Unit 1 will be developed next spring for the following year. So yes, a little bit like the building the airplane while we fly it, but experience at least has taught me, and it is best practice to jump right in, because we still have to teach the standards anyway. And so for next year, we'll be staying a couple steps ahead of the game. Got it.
All right, thank you.
And for those of you who don't know, who didn't hear a little bit of my experience in this before, I've been through this process, full-on process, twice over 7 years. And so I do have some experience to fall back on. And then we're also working with a consulting group called Educational Excellence that are considered the gold standard here in Oregon. They work with many districts in Oregon. So that gives you a little bit of the big idea of goal 1. This document here gets really into the educationalese, and I'm gonna, give you some time to read it to yourself. If you have questions, I can come back and address this with you. But essentially what it does is it lays out step by step how we're gonna address what I just talked about. And if you key in, say, on number 5, because whatever we ask our leaders to do, whatever we ask our teachers to do, our leaders will also do. That gives you an idea of just how steep the learning curve has become for our instructional leaders in the district. That this is where this work becomes very, very intellectually challenging. And so our instructional leaders have had projection mapping. They're going into unit mapping and implementation monitoring. We just had last Friday leadership training in structured classroom walkthroughs, how to give teacher feedback, what artifacts to look for so that the feedback is meaningful for our staff, and so on. Going into the second goal, which is SEL, I basically look at the first 2 goals of the strategic plan as 1A and 1B, not just 1 and 2. The 2 go hand in hand. You cannot separate out a child's social emotional learning from their academic behaviors. The 2 go hand in hand. It's all about relationship building. It's all about giving students the self-regulation strategies that they need to be successful in a traditional classroom. And this again are the key strategies to get there. And we do have some training scheduled for this year, but this will be a work in progress. I would say that not just in Silver Falls, this is my humble opinion, not just in Silver Falls, but in Oregon, if not the rest of the country, this is the most underdeveloped part of public education, is actually teaching the explicit skills that students need to be successful socially and emotionally. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're going to do it together as a team. And again, we're talking about tier 1. So we're talking about what all students need. And some students come to us, at various levels of their social emotional skill set. Some are really good at regulating their feelings, others are not. And we see this many times when kids come to their first school experience, which is kindergarten. And if they didn't get this type of instruction early on, or at least modeled for them, it doesn't get better on its own. And so one of the things we know is that we need to put certain checks in place that we know that every child in Silver Falls School District gets a certain level of high quality instruction relative to social emotional learning, and that should be integrated into the academic units the kids are already being exposed to. So we're teaching those school dispositions to kids so they can be responsible learners and self-managers. And a couple of examples of that looks like, one of the areas that we address in tier 1 as far as social emotional behaviors go is zones of regulation. So can students identify, when they're in a green zone, when they're calm, or when they're starting to, their behaviors getting a little bit elevated? Are they able to recognize that? And if they're able to recognize getting dysregulated, do they know how to bring themselves back down into a calm state of behavior? And there's a lot of different ways to get at that, but that gives you an idea of the tier 1 type of instruction that we need to be teaching all kids. And this doesn't just occur at kindergarten. This is for all grades, and it looks different developmentally as you progress up. But one of the things we know in our strategic plan is we want to graduate students who are ready to take on the world. And part of that is understanding your own emotional quotient. And we all know the research around EQ and how important that is. And it starts at a very young age. So that gives you an idea about goal number 2, which I call 1B. Any questions on that?
Just one minor one. I was just thinking about item number 1 on the results. 50% reduction over the year prior. Of course, last year was kind of a bizarre year. Is that specifically aimed at last year, or is that more of a general?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Jonathan. It had completely slipped my mind, but the idea of school improvement is to effective school improvement is to come up with reasonable goals. And yes, we had a really, really tough year last year, totally out of the ordinary. But we also know we're going into a year, we may have 5 days of in-person instruction, but we got a lot of work to do too. So what we want to do is just take the number of absences that happened last year, and school principals will come up with that number and then cut it in half. That's the goal. Just cut it in half. And then next year we'll cut it in half again. And so it's this idea of reducing the gap by 50% each year that will eventually get us to where we want to be.
Thank you.
Yeah, and last year's tough too, because we don't have anything to compare it to. All we can do is move forward. So I'm glad you brought that up, Jonathan. Also, if you look back on the first goal here, if you look going back to that 50%, what we want to know is for elementary, for example, how many of our kids were off track, were not on track to make a year's growth. How do we determine that number and then cut that by 50%? So that's something that we're working with our principals on. That's being factored into their goals as well. All of our administrators' goals are direct alignment to these goals as well. And that would just make logical sense that if these are the goals we're laying out for the school district, that this is our focus for next year. This is how I hope to be evaluated in terms of how we started versus how we ended up, that our instructional leaders play a big part in this as well. Having said that, going from 1A and 1B, goal 3, which is a totally different kind of goal, but actually a very necessary one for Silver Falls. And I went deep into this during day 1 of the Leadership Institute. And I believe that the original language on the strategic plan says that our facilities should reflect the excellence of education in Silver Falls, or something to that effect. What I would say is I would challenge us to think about it in terms of one day having facilities that actually reflect our love and respect that we have for our kids. And that's really where we are. Silver Falls is such an anomaly when it comes to facilities, because it doesn't make sense. You look at how engaged our community is. You look at how much our community loves its teachers, loves its schools, loves the school district. And I'm talking about historically here. It doesn't make sense that we have the type of facilities that we have for our kids. They are literally falling down. We can't have class in one building at Silvercrest when it snows. The roof at the middle school has another year or so, and then it's going to cost $1 million just to put another quick fix to it. You know, these buildings have been around for a long time, and there's not much holding them together anymore. And so we're doing a lot of work with the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee. We will be delivering to the board a recommendation by late November on what that will look like. I've briefed you all on that. You've seen the 2 brochures that the committee has worked really hard to put together to outline the scenario that we have come to consensus on, which is a unanimous agreement that we need a new middle school. That's unanimous. And anywhere I go, I have never heard, at least in my time in Silver Falls, albeit short, an argument against a new middle school. In addition to getting the necessary fixes to our K-8 so we can make them warm, safe, and dry. So that we can at least get to a place where kids are coming to safe facilities. And we also know how much our K-8s mean to our school communities and how distinct our school communities are. One of the questions that keeps coming up in the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee is this idea of, have we ever asked the K-8 communities if they would want a new K-8? And if so, would they be interested in the consolidation of K-8s in exchange for a larger K-8 facility? Now, a lot of people will tell you that that question's been asked before, but I can't find any record of it. And so because that question keeps coming up, and some of you are on that committee with me, I have taken it upon myself to form a work group to get to the bottom of that answer and to really figure out what our K-8 communities want their future to look like. And so I have hired a consulting firm I've been working with. I'm working with one of our principals, Brett Davison. We have formed a work group that's made up of 21 of the most influential people in our rural areas. And we are developing a process for how we will go into K-8 communities in September on the 21st, 22nd, 27th, and 28th to hold listening sessions in each one of our K-8 areas to really get to the bottom of what our K-8 communities want their future to look like. And I will be formalizing that in a report back to the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee and then to the board. It will be a supplemental document in the recommendation that the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee has for the board. And whatever comes out of that report and answering the question on, do you want K-8s consolidated in exchange for a larger K-8 in addition to what you'd like your future to look like as a K-8 community? When those answers are formalized, I will consider that the final word on the topic. This document, in my mind, needs to stand the test of time. And it's time that we take questions like this that have been floating around for decades in the Silver Falls community and finally get to the bottom of it. And in my mind, what we need to do in terms of goal 3 is build trust. Build trust with our communities, that we're listening to them, and that when we ask them what they want their K-8 futures to look like, that we respond accordingly, and that we go back to them with what we've done with their feedback as well. And so any questions on this piece?
I just want to say I want to thank you for discussing this, because one of our core values is in fact safety. And that safety lens is so critical right now where we're at with COVID, but also with our schools and the students that we serve. So thank you for laying out the plan ahead.
I think what it also says, at least to me as the superintendent of Silver Falls, is, and what I'm finding is that no community wants to hear, "We know what's best for you." What communities want to be asked is, what do you want your future to look like? And what we're finding is that this is a new through line. This is a new course that we're charting for our K-8 communities to give them an avenue to express to us how they want that to look. And it's up to us to honor that, because Silver Falls is one of the most wonderful things about this district is its configuration and the fact that we are a school district, not a district of individual schools, but that we also value and respect the values of each community. So I think there's a lot of great work ahead. Our next meeting with the work group is our final meeting on August 31st. Jennifer, Aaron, and Jonathan are serving on that work group as observers. And I am very thankful to have their help as well. Any other questions on goal 3? I think just to close out goal 3, I cannot overstate enough how important it is that we start thinking about the bond now. I know that there's a lot of extenuating circumstances, a lot of external pressures, things we have no control over, but we should never be in the business of excuse making. Our children will only continue to pay the price in substandard facilities. We've got to start thinking about it now, and it is possible. We just need to come together and figure out what course we're going to take. But we've got to start thinking about that now. Even though we're a couple years away, I really want to challenge everyone, all 7 members of our board, to start thinking about what this will look like. Because the longer we put this off, the more expensive it's going to be. To fix every single school and every single thing in this district will be $175 million. There's no way one bond is going to pay for $175 million. What we need is a very sizable bond to take care of the most immediate needs right now. But this by no means will be the only bond Silver Falls will need. But at the end of the day, it is up to the 8 of us to make sure that this bond is successful. Because if it's not, there's no plan B here. We take $42 million into the state school fund, out of the state school fund into our general fund every year. There's no way we can even pay for the deferred maintenance at this point. And that's why a bond is so critical. And it's going to take every bit of our intellectual being to figure out the course that's going to get us to a successful point on this. And I think that is widely agreed upon as the reality facing Silver Falls. I think it's the biggest challenge facing our district, because these decisions that we make now will affect generations of children to come, even children that are unborn right now. And so I don't mean to be melodramatic, overly dramatic about this, but this is a real interesting situation, because it doesn't make sense when you look at the love that our community has for its schools and then the conditions that our students and staff need to endure on a daily basis. So having said that, I want to end with this visual right here, which is the flywheel. And the flywheel concept, I want to use the bond as an example, okay? Because one of the things that we know drives our resource engine in Silver Falls, going back to the hedgehog concept, is trust. And trust has been a very scarce commodity in Silver Falls since unification happened 30 years ago. Everybody knows it. Everybody speaks freely about it. Everybody speaks transparently about it. And the only way, in my estimation, that we can start to build that back is predictable actions and processes over time, which then builds predictability, which in turn, hopefully will build trust. But we need to start taking every single opportunity we have to build in this predictability so that we get good pushes on the flywheel so we can get it moving. This shows a moving flywheel. Our flywheel in Silver Falls has only moved an inch. It is not a free flowing flywheel at this point. We have a lot of issues we're trying to tackle. There's been a lot of distraction with COVID and other things. And we're right now focusing our efforts going into this year on a focused, operationalized plan, going back to the 5-year strategic plan. And we're just starting to get pushes on this flywheel. The K-8 community work group that some of you work with, have worked with me on, is another push on this flywheel. Every time we have a board meeting and we have good dialogue and modeling civil discourse and disagreement in a professional manner is another push on the flywheel. It's all these little pushes on the flywheel that'll end up giving us trust as an outcome years down the road. And it's time we start right now. We can't lose any momentum on that. And so I just want to end with this symbol here in the flywheel concept, because I think it gives us the best representation of where we are right now. And I will tell you that even though we've been through incredibly difficult times, we've just had some difficult news handed to us. We're coming up with a strategy for how we're going to navigate through this recent news. I think the future looks extremely bright for Silver Falls, and I hope that you would agree with me on that. Having said that, I'll take questions, and then I have one final thought.
I do have one question. It actually goes back to goal 1. I was thinking about what you were saying right before you transitioned to goal 3, actually. And, we were talking about how the instructional leaders were going to try to determine, what that looked like in terms of bringing, well, I was rereading 1 and maybe 2, I guess, there on the right. And one question, and I don't need an answer tonight, but I think it'll be really interesting, is how are we going to identify the amount of lost academic rigor that occurred last year? Because we know it's significant. It's not just a guess. We know it is, but how do we identify it, and how do we measure our ability to bring that back into on track?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really, really astute observation, Jonathan. And I think part of it, and having been through day 1 of the Leadership Institute, how important it is for an organization to accept brutal facts. And one of the brutal facts that we have is Silver Falls has never had common assessment. And state assessment data should never be looked at to make building level change. That's more for policymakers and other things, because it doesn't get at where exactly our kids are in the progression of their learning. So first thing we need to do is get kids back in the building 5 days a week. That is imperative. So we can get those kids in front of us and try to figure out where they are relative to their grade level standards. I would say it's going to be another year or so before we get common assessment in place to where we're actually going through the cycles of seeing what we intended to be taught and what kids actually learned. And there we can scientifically figure out what the delta is between those two. But I would say in the short term, we've got to get kids back into school 5 days a week. We just have to. And just because we don't have common assessment doesn't mean we don't have assessment practices. Don't get me wrong, because we have excellent teachers here. It's just that they're not necessarily aligned to each other. So we can't make team level decisions on how best to serve kids. So does that help, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, that was great. And like I said, I knew it was something you guys are still working through in terms of figuring out, but it just kind of struck me as we were talking about the measures and the indicators, one of the things you have to have is a baseline to compare against, right? So we have to sort of know what it is we lost, and then we can measure whether we've made any of it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I would say it's state assessment data is better than nothing. We do have that, but it's so unreliable because we don't know what the testing conditions look like. And we don't quite know, exactly, what instruction was given and how much kids actually learn. So even that's going to be tough to figure out. It's going to take some time.
Thank you.
Any other questions on any of this?
Yeah, and like Jonathan, I don't expect any answer tonight, but I think one of the things that concerns me with this year ahead is that we have students that may be medically fragile and they may not be able to come to the classes 5 days a week. And that has been a concern, I think, for me, and from what I hear from other families. So I'm not sure what that looks like. I know what our goals are, but I'm wondering if there's any probability of any alternatives for those that may be nervous about coming back to school for their health. And again, I do not expect any answer tonight, but that has been a concern for me, especially in the last 2 weeks with everything that's been unfolding.
Yeah, I think that's a very legitimate concern, Lori, and very, very much so. I would say that if we're coming back to 5 days a week of in-person instruction, that is what we're set up for as a public education system. And right now, we don't have the resources to run a full comprehensive distance learning program.
Okay.
The size of district that we are. Now, having said that, there's all manner of things we can do to serve each child in context. So we're just going to have to take a look at, what that looks like on a case by case basis.
Okay.
That actually is something that Silver Falls does quite well. But in terms of offering a second alternative to in-person instruction, it's going to take all of our resources just to run a 5-day-a-week model of in-person instruction.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome, Lori. Any other questions?
Scott, I wanted to just ask the question. By the way, great. I love the presentation and especially the flywheel, the moving flywheel picture. I'd like to have that, like a screenshot of that just to remind, yes, that one. I think that is super inspirational for me. The question that I have is about the results indicators, because this is obviously the most important work that you're going to be doing, and it's also what we're going to use to as part, in conjunction with the OSBA COSA standards for your evaluation. So do you expect to report on every single results indicator?
Yes. So the results indicators that are laid out relative to the key strategies, I will report out on at the end of the year. And all of this will fit into the domains of the superintendent evaluation framework. So my thought was to take this operationalized plan and then mold it into the domain, so it's a little bit easier to read, if you will. When I go over the progress check, I believe this fall, and then the winter, and so on.
Awesome. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was clear about what your intent was on that, so that when we vote tonight to approve, that's
Yes.
kind of all rolled up in one.
Yeah, I wouldn't put down a results indicator that I didn't think I couldn't deliver on. And so I'm not saying there's 100% for certain that we will be able to deliver on that, but certainly it's there because I feel it's reasonable, and it's because it's the work we should be doing.
Well, and I kind of like the fact that there are multiple, because, if something does, we want to have if you just had like
Holistic view.
one or two, that might not be as holistic a look at it. So yeah, I like the idea. Thank you so much.
Well, and can I just add something to that? I agree with Jennifer. I think it's really helpful to have them. Some of them are quantitatively measurable, so that's easier. Some of them are going to be really qualitative. And I just want us to keep that in mind, that, whether you, provide surveys to staff or surveys to students, there are going to be a variety of ways that you're going to have to collect your data. And And so I think we need to keep in mind, some of those ways of capturing those results will need to be nuanced, in terms of our understanding of them. So, and just because they're not hard and fast, it's not count from 1 to 10 kind of thing. Some of them are pretty complex.
Well, thanks, Scott. Are there any other questions for him before we move?
I just had one final
Oh,
thought,
go
if
ahead.
if I could, and this is unrelated, but I want to mention it because I don't want to let any more time go by, and I just want to speak in general terms if I could. And number one, I just want to say how thankful I am to work for all of you. I feel honored and privileged to do that. I think that you all serve as a model for other boards to look to. We have a diversity of thought on our board and a diversity of what we hold dear and in terms of our different individual values and value systems. And I think that just makes for a really exciting place to work. So I wanted to thank you on that. The second is that just about everybody in Silver Falls has my cell phone number. All staff do. I just gave my cell phone number to all of our new bus drivers. And I would say that most of our stakeholders in Silver Falls have my number as well. And by doing that, I leave myself open to getting information all the time. And so even though I don't participate in social media, I have a LinkedIn account, but that's for professional, positive types of stuff. It's a way to keep me in touch with my professional network. I don't do Instagram or Facebook or any of that, never have. But people certainly send me screenshots of what they get, especially when it has to do with, individuals that are connected to Silver Falls. And I received a screenshot last week that was very disparaging against 2 of our board members. It was in disagreement to whatever the person thought our board members said. But the reason why I'm bringing it up tonight is because it was so disparaging because it had personal insults attached to it. And I just want to say that if I had not said anything tonight, that would mean that I agree with it, and I don't. And I just want you to know that I would extend that to each and every one of my 7 board members that I report to. And I would hope that you would do that for each other as well. I don't want to mention who said what or what it entailed, but it was egregious enough to me to where I want to bring it up in a public setting to say that when I say we need to stick together on this, it means that we don't always agree, but we all want what's best for kids, and we all love Silver Falls children. And I would just encourage each and one of you that if you see something like that, that you reach out to that person, whoever it is, and admonish them that, we engage in professional behaviors. Disagreement is one, but one thing that I can't tolerate are personal insults to a person, whether it's one of our employees or one of our board members. And so I just want to make sure that I say that for the record. And I would do that for each one of you, like I would for my own team, and like I would for any family in Silver Falls.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll stop screen sharing if I can figure this out.
As a reminder, we will have an action item tonight regarding these goals. Okay. Well, that moves us to 3C, which is our public comment statement. We discussed that last meeting and had tabled it for some additional modifications, and we're going to bring it back tonight. I don't know, Janet or Lori, if you wanted to take a lead on what was changed since we last looked at it.
I think there was just minor tweaking on some edits that came from the last session. Does that sound about right to you, Janet?
Yes, and I'm trying to remember now because it was like a week and a half ago.
I know.
So I think what we did was we took the phrase from the top. Trying to remember. I'm so sorry. We wanted to make sure that folks knew. Is this the new version?
Well, I was going to ask that question. I didn't actually pull up the old version, but when I opened
Yeah.
it, it looked very similar. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just ask you what changed and go from there.
Because I thought we had wanted some comment about the rarely will the public receive an immediate response. And I'm
Right.
pretty sure I moved that into the statement because we wanted that referenced in the statement.
Right.
And we removed, I believe we removed the chair may choose to disallow comments that are duplicative. So I don't know that this is the new one. If you want to move on, what I can do is just check my files here super quick and take a look at the one I
Because
have.
you sent it to me, right? So it
I
should be
sent
in
it
the
to you and I
email.
sent it to Debbie. Yeah. So let me, if you don't mind, just giving me a couple minutes, don't let me hold you up and I'll just take a quick look.
No, that's fine. We can wait a minute. That's fine. I mean, we only have one additional discussion item and
Okay. I just need to go to my folders here.
Oh. Hmm.
Okay. So yeah, this is not the new
I
version.
can't pull it up.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can, well, let's see. I can try to screen share. Or we can just bump it to our next meeting so that you have a chance to actually read the new one.
I'm fine actually, probably either way, but there is no urgency to this particular action.
Sure.
So I guess I will recommend let's just go ahead and bump it. I don't think
Okay.
there's an urgent need to process this tonight. So
All right.
anybody disagree? I mean, I'm happy
I
to
don't.
be persuaded otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
I'll take my piece of this as well. I really should have checked before. I kind of was expecting to open it and see a few deltas and sort of just talk about it. And I didn't until right before the meeting. So I didn't know.
Right.
this.
And yeah, I didn't think to do that either. So my apologies. I should have double checked that. I wonder, let me check the second one on our action items. Maybe that one's, no, that's also the old one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, it sounds like everybody's in agreement. Let's just, we'll just bump it again to the next meeting. Thanks.
Mhm.
All right. Last discussion item, in-person meetings during a mask mandate. So we switched over to in-person meetings. Golly, was it July? We've only had about 3 of them,
July,
handful. And we then had the mandate for masking, which impacts not our ability to actually meet as an in-person group. We are able to distance, we are able to mask. What it does is it means we would have to be masked when we meet, which has its downsides, right? For sure. And so the discussion tonight is to get a sense of where the board is at regarding this. There's no action item tied to this. This is just a discussion so that I have a sense of where this board is at and how people feel regarding our options. And I see it, I want to be clear, no matter what we would decide, we would continue to allow Zoom in for anybody who felt that that was an appropriate course of action. So I'll just open it up for conversation. And in fact, I'll even start with just a few thoughts, just maybe to get the ball rolling. One is, logistically, I've had a lot of issues over the last 1.5 years with my connection. Tonight seems to be okay, I think. But so logistically, I do better in person. I also sort of prefer the interaction. That would probably be true even if masked, although of course you lose some of the nonverbal cues. And so I would probably be in favor of continuing to allow that, but again, that's just where I'm at. I'm kind of curious where other people are at.
Yeah, Jonathan, I like you. I think at this point I'm zoomed out. If we get to a place where we have to be on Zoom, of course, we have to move to this technology. There's no question about that. At this point, the rule is that we're asked to wear masks indoors. And, it's akin to, as I see it, is the same as the requirement for our students when they return to school here in a couple of weeks. They're asked to wear masks, yet, work through it and all do their best to try to have as much of a normal school day as possible. And I think we can model that behavior as well as board members that, yes, masks are inconvenience. Yes, they cover our face. But to persevere through and to model that behavior of which we're asking for our students to do here in a couple of weeks. Again, there is no mandates really barring us from meeting in person. And I'm willing to, I think all of us would, or hopefully would be willing to just say, look, if we can meet in person, we can persevere through it by wearing a mask. And our public can come, fair well knowing that they're going to have to wear a mask as well when they're at the meeting. I would like to see that being made mandatory and that everybody would comply with that. And we do owe it to our students to model that behavior, but I also feel like we owe it to our public, who also prefers to be in in-person meetings. And again, we have no statutes or OARs or anything barring us from meetings. So I think we need to persevere through it and do our best, even though we may have to wear masks and continue to meet in person. Again, also with that Zoom option.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
I'll jump in just for a little bit here. I really like having the Zoom option for our community as well. I think that there are a number of them who find that a lot more convenient, as we get into the cold, rainy winter months. I think we'd find better engagement overall if this continues to be an option. So I like that. I don't disagree with Aaron about modeling that for our students. I think it is a little trickier with microphones and the sound, when we're speaking through masks. So not sure how that will work, but I agree sort of conceptually that's a good thing to model that. I myself have we have a bit of a medical situation in our family, so I will continue to access it remotely. We just need to be incredibly careful at the moment. Yeah, I think I like the Zoom option. I have a little bit of a concern about enforcing the masking among our community members. And to what extent we would be prepared to take that on if we found ourselves in public meetings where there were community members who were deciding not to be masked, to attend and not be masked. And I don't know how we would necessarily handle that. So that's a little bit of a concern.
That's a fair concern, and I appreciate that. Any other thoughts to share on this matter?
I guess I would add that I suppose some of you are more attuned to Zoom meetings than I am. I haven't done very many, but I just haven't found the ones that I've done to be as, I'll just say I prefer the in-person meetings, even if we are masked, to the Zoom meetings. And I found that also taking public testimony via Zoom, I know some people will continue to do that, but it's been difficult even in the few times that I've been on the board, listening with people's differing technologies and abilities that way. So I would like to meet in person, and that would also give people the option of either that they prefer.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, I was thinking about that masking question, Janet. We're all modeling it, and hopefully we can make it really clear that that is our expectation. I certainly would not hesitate to make sure that that was stated as an expectation, right? It's a privilege to be able to attend. This is our meeting, right? And it's a privilege to be able for the public to attend. That privilege can, be revoked if people abuse the requirements. And right now there's a mask mandate requirement for indoor meetings. And so, yeah, I would expect that to be, very clear. As to your question, if somebody refused, right? Well, I'm not going to get up and manhandle them out the door. So I don't know what that looks like either. But I think hopefully, we can set a good example, and I think people will be charitable and follow our lead. At least I hope.
I hope I didn't insinuate that there would be any heavy-handedness about asking people to wear masks. That's not what I was trying to say. So I did want to clarify that. I like you, Jonathan, say, modeling is going to be a big part of it, us as board members and our staff. And then also just, I think, I always abide by a soft answer turns away wrath, right? You can be gently and nicely and professionally just, hey, maybe even a soft word. Hey, if you next time, please wear your masks when you come to the meeting. Thanks a lot. We really appreciate that. A nice soft answer will definitely help, I think, with our community.
Right.
And I think, and I'm positive and optimistic that they'll respond and comply.
I have the same feeling, so hopefully that's the case.
I can take a turn. I would, the concerns that Janet expressed about the, potential enforcement issues, that is a concern for me too. And I agree that, I expect the best. And I would hope that if we have any issues, that we can, I don't know, just consider a different course of action, because you'll hear this from me a lot, probably, that I like to be really focused and get the work done, and having any distractions, any unnecessary distractions, I think is always a concern for me. I honestly don't love wearing the mask, and in this situation, I like to be able to see people's faces, and I like other people to be able to see my face. And so I like that for every situation, right? But the work that we do is just twice a month, and it is, we don't have a lot of opportunities. Like when I'm at work, I wear a mask, but I'm seeing the same people over and over and over again. And I am able to emote in ways that we just can't in our board work. And so for me, I guess I lean towards being able to see people's faces, and if Zoom's the way we can do that, that's the way I would want to lean. I am not opposed to wearing a mask in our meetings. I can totally do that. One thing I wondered about is, do we want to say some meetings are going to be in person and other meetings are going to be Zoom? Because I know that we were going to try to meet in different school locations. And so that would be an important thing to do in person, right? It's hard to do that via Zoom. So anyway, those are just random thoughts. I'm not married to any of those thoughts, really. I don't have super strong feelings about any of that, but those are just my, the ideas that are floating around in my head.
Yeah, thank you.
Jennifer, my thought would, be that, we meet in person as long as we safely can, again, to model that behavior for our students, that, if we have to go to Zoom, for sure, that definitely move over there. But my preference would be to make sure that we're meeting as much as we can in person, with the safety measures in place.
And I can totally see that argument. I can see a lot of different ways here. There might not be a wrong answer in this discussion.
One compromise or might be to say, let's continue to meet in Zoom for work sessions. if we feel like it's a good way to be able to collaborate. We tend to do sort of more of the work during work sessions, and possibly then meet in person for the actual regular board meetings that we would like to be able to pivot to have in those school buildings. And of course, we don't know when that will be possible, but that would just be one way to kind of slice it, if that was something that we wanted to do.
Well, and I actually assumed that we would do work sessions in the locations because
Oh,
that's
okay.
what we did before. But there's
Okay.
no, I mean, I think probably the answer lies in Daniel and staff's ability to, move the technology around.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we're, just so you know, we're developing the technology right now so that we have like a mobile system, and it's coming along just fine. So just so you know, we're totally flexible on that. Just offering that.
Yeah, I don't know about the public comment piece. I guess people could just do it with Zoom.
Mhm.
If they don't want to travel, to the location. Well, it's something that the public can also, weigh in on too. If they're listening tonight, they can tell us what they think.
It's also our intent to always have the Zoom option forever. Now we're going to make use of that technology so that we can boost the participation at every board meeting. So just wanted to add that too.
I think there may have been some legislation around that piece too, as far as that actually being required because of access. I don't know if that's legislation may be using that term too broadly, but I do believe there was some points made around access for more people, because across the state they've obviously seen an increase in participation.
Mhm.
We've also not tried doing the microphones with the masks.
Right.
Yeah,
we can say that we've all this board have all done the Zoom thing. Tonight we're doing it, right? And so we have the experience of in person with, without the mask requirement. We have the experience of Zoom. And so, if we try the in person with the masks and we don't love it, I'm hoping we can, talk about that.
Well, for sure, there's room to pivot if there are issues. Tom's not here tonight to speak his mind, but I did ask him about it just so I had a sense, and I think he was also in favor of opening it back up to in person. This has been really helpful. I think at an absolute minimum, we'll probably try, next regular board meeting with the option to be in person. And again, we'll figure out what the masking feels like. We'll see if there's issues with the public. We'll see if there's mic issues, right? We'll kind of wait through it and see how it goes. And again, there will be room to pivot if we run into issues. Any other comments before we close this one? Okay. Well, we now have 2 action items. We don't normally, actually, we only have one. We postponed one. We have one. We don't normally do them in work sessions, but in this particular case, it made the most sense. Scott was presenting these goals for the first time right after our last meeting, and we wanted to make sure that we approved them as soon as possible after he had a chance to finalize them. So we do have one action item. It is the superintendent goals that were presented tonight. And at this point, I would accept a motion to approve Scott's superintendent goals as presented tonight.
I move to approve the superintendent goals for 2021-2022.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion tonight? No. Okay, Debbie?
Jonathan,
I vote yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Lori,
yes.
Tom, excuse me, Aaron.
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor.
All in favor. Well, thanks, Scott. Really appreciate the presentation, both at the workshop and then again tonight. And I do really think that's great work. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all.
All right. Well, without objection, meeting adjourned. Good night, everybody.
Very good.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Good night.